I'd like to welcome our last speaker of the day, Tommy Watt.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Tommy and I work mostly in theatre, classical music and film and TV. So I'll talk a bit about how I got started, how I got to where I am now, what I might have done differently, and then about some of the practicalities of being a working photographer. I'll leave a bit of time at the end for Q&A because I think this is great. I didn't study photography, I'm just self-taught, so I wish I'd had an opportunity like this to ask a working photographer how certain things work. So let me just check this works all right. Yeah. I'll talk about the history first. So it started for me when I was 14, and my parents gave me my first camera. That was a wee digital thing that came free with a computer that they'd bought. So I don't know how old many of you are, but this thing looked like this, and that was 0.3 megapixels. But I took that everywhere with me, and I didn't have a particular interest in photography, but back then, of course, you didn't have cameras on, there was no smartphones or anything like that, so I would take that to school, and that would be a real novelty because I was the only person that had a camera. And so I suppose everybody documents their high school lives now, but any photos that exist from my time at high school, I'm probably the only one that has them. But as I say, I didn't have an interest in photography. I like taking pictures, partly to document, and it was partly a social thing, but I took it everywhere, did everything. So the first sort of, what's maybe sparked the interest in photography or the idea that I could take it seriously was, I went to Kyle Academy, so just along the road, and in my free periods I'd maybe go, down the river, and I took a picture of some mushrooms growing on the side of a tree. And I can't remember where I heard about this competition, but I entered into something called Visions of Science, and ended up winning, and that's, from I had to Google that, that's still up on our website somewhere. So that was a start, and then my parents could see that I was really interested in it, and so they were happy to maybe spend a bit more than they might have, for my Christmas presents, my birthday presents, getting me better cameras. And so by the time I went to university, I got a Nikon D70, which is probably the first the camera that made digital SLRs probably mainstream. But even back then, it was not common to see somebody with a digital SLR. So when I was carrying that around, I might just be out for a walk, taking pictures of whatever interested me. But if I was in a nice neighbourhood, you have people stopping you, like going, "What are you doing?" But not in a friendly way. You would think you were a creep or a weirdo, or why have you got a camera, you're up to no good. And you couldn't take it to rough neighbourhoods because it would get nicked. There was one time I was walking the East End of Glasgow and the police stopped me and they said, "What's that for?" And I said, "Well, it's just my hobby." And they went, "Aye, but do you know where you are? Put that away." So back then it was a bit odd, but it was useful for me in university because whereas I'd maybe appreciated in high school, because I was quite a shy boy in high school, the value of the camera to sort of, you could literally hide your face with it, when you were feeling awkward. But at university it became an icebreaker or a good way to come out of your shell and then to engage with people by taking the photo and that kind of thing. So I became, I think, known at university as the guy with the camera to a lot of people that I hang out with and so on. And that became handy at this time, as I say, it was just a hobby. I wasn't looking for paid work, but then my first bits of paid work came to me through that. A guy that I lived with in uni halls, he was like, "Oh, my work need a photographer for a thing that was happening, and would you like to do it?" So it was quite cool because actually so my first bit of paid work was a visit from the German ambassador to Glasgow. So that was an event I photographed at City Chambers, and so I got a wee taste of that, and then later on in university I went on a student exchange to Pakistan. That had nothing to do with photography. It was run by the British Council and Glasgow University. But when those organisations saw the pictures that I'd taken while I was in Pakistan, they started to give me some paid work. So I think I was just 20, and I had a wee look through all these pictures for the first time in years, and that was the only one that I really quite liked. All the other ones I was like, "Oh God, you wish I could go back now and take them again," because I was so young and inexperienced. But that was really setting me on the way to, or planted the seeds of thinking that I could maybe do this professionally. And so when I graduated, I turned down an opportunity. My summer job was at a law firm, and I was offered a traineeship, but I thought, no, this is what I'd like to do. So that's what I did, which is not to say that it was easy. I'd say the 3 years that followed my graduation were pretty tough. I mean, like really scraping by, borrowing money from friends and family, and that's a time for like sort of like hustling. So doing anything that came up. So you do club nights for, 20 quid, or my parents' neighbours want a picture of their baby. Just do anything, and it gets you experience, even if it's not the kind of thing you might want to be doing. And back then, before Instagram or anything like that, or smartphones, basically the ability to share your work easily. That is to say, in the moment you meet someone, you want to show them something. I actually carried around a little photo album with my best work in it, so that if anybody ever wanted to see anything, it was there. So just always trying to put yourself out there, but not in a sort of like, I wasn't like, how to put this, I wasn't always like talking to people just because I wanted to get work from them, but it was just a good way to get things out there. So I'll move to the next one. Yeah, so here's an example of, I mean, even though I was doing that kind of work for clubs, you've got to get pictures of just drunken idiots having a good time. Basically, that's what they want you to get. But there's no reason that I couldn't have been doing my own thing and, seeing moments that I like, that appeal to me, that aren't necessarily going to be on the website or the Bebo or the MySpace as it was back then the next day. Yeah, that's another example of stuff that I would just take for myself. I particularly like this one actually, because the two guys in the middle there, that's the moment of realisation. They just realised they've just walked into a gay club. So, let's see. Yeah, I eventually sort of got into working in, I mean, as I say, theatre is mostly what I work in now, and the way I got into that was doing headshots for actors and models. A lot of my friends sort of worked in that industry or were aspiring to be that. So, that's an example of the kind of things you would do for headshots. And back then, that probably one of the most entrepreneurial things I ever did actually was, I just stood outside the RSAMD, as it was back then, the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland now, and as the students came out, just flyed them. You need headshots, and there was some examples of my work on that, and that actually I did really well out of that. And I was also taking initiative in other things. So my degree was literature, so that's sort of my interest. And the Edinburgh Book Festival, which happens every year, and has some big names, sometimes very big names. I think one of the biggest ones I saw there was Sean Connery when his memoirs came out. I just applied for press accreditation, and if you've got a professional website and you apply for a lot of these festivals, then you generally get. You don't actually have to be using them for anything. I just wanted to be building up my portfolio. So, for example, that's something that came out of that. And again, and sadly now, actually, the backgrounds that they have say Edinburgh Book Festival on them, still good for your portfolio, but they don't have quite the same timeless quality as if you're photographing against a nice plain background like that. But stuff like that was quite useful to me in my early days, and even though there wasn't Instagram, as I say, probably the most important thing for me in my the early stage of my career was Flickr. I don't know if any of you remember Flickr, or I mean, it still exists, but it's not much of nobody really uses it anymore. Instagram took it over, or not took it over, but the place that it occupied has now been taken over by Instagram. And it's a shame because Instagram is, Instagram, it's, you get to put your work out there, but nobody's really that interested in photography. It's, it's more about, influencers and, about conspicuous consumerism and all that. But in Flickr it was nice because people were interested in photography. That's what they wanted to talk about in Flickr. There was a lot of comments. There was critique as well, which was really handy because nobody ever on Instagram, nobody's actually going to give anybody any advice on how to do better, are they? I don't think it'd be appreciated if they did, but actually getting that kind of thing from Flickr was really useful to me. And at that time, I mean, the stuff I was sharing on Flickr, I was just documenting my social life, which was mostly in, you know, bars and clubs, you know, my pals in the city smoking. And a friend of mine who was a photographer, an older guy than me, went, "Oh, you know, these are lovely images," told me, "but you'll never make any money photographing your pals smoking." And I never did, but I came close once, which was because I was starting to get a bit of a following on Flickr, and I got an email from Leo Burnett, which is an ad agency in Chicago. They were responsible for creating the Marlboro Man, and they sent me an email saying, "Would you be comfortable shooting for Big Tobacco? Do you have any moral problems with that?" And if I did, it didn't do better because I knew they could pay me enough to not have a problem with it. But I was so excited. I mean, I was 21, and I was like, yeah, I'm up for this. And they talked about shooting this campaign in Chicago, and I don't think they knew I was 21. That's the thing. And they asked me to send through a list of my team and kit and so on and everything that I would need. You know, and basically, you know, a quote for all the costs and everything. And stupid. I sent them back an email saying, "Oh, it's just me and my camera." And then they go, "Oh, I think we're going to go with something else, actually." So it would have been useful for me to maybe have had somebody in the know at that point that I could have contacted and how to go about a thing like that. I mean, I think they would have found out anyway. And I think now it's probably quite cool to have some like young ingenue doing your sort of like big campaigns, but I don't think that would have flown back then. But other things that happened where, I mean, again, this is just something else from in a club, but Sony Ericsson eventually bought the rights to a whole series of pictures that I'd taken like that in clubs of people looking at their phones, and they used them in an ad campaign. It took quite a while, but I had to source everyone in because these were just strangers to me, but I had to find everyone in the pictures and get them to sign moral release forms, in some cases pay them a bit. But that was what was great about Flickr. I don't know that Instagram quite works in that same way for that kind of thing as well now. But as I say, I was growing a following on Flickr, and I started to get a couple of like big jobs or unlikely jobs, or I mean, even now I sort of like quite amazed that I did these things, especially that young. So when I was 23, I got a message on Flickr from a young French film director who had just won a major competition, and I mean, he was sort of the same age as me, and he was quite sort of blown away by it all because off the back of that, his short film was set in Hong Kong, and off the back of that, he'd been contacted by a media executive who wanted to shoot a music video in Hong Kong, and had given him this massive budget, unlike anything. Well, see, the guy had just graduated, and he said that he'd followed my work on Flickr for a while, and he wanted me to do the stills for it. My dad's from Hong Kong, and I spent a lot of time there. And so yeah, I got flown out to Hong Kong to do the stills for 2 weeks on this sort of quite big budget music video, which was an incredible experience. But again, I didn't know what I was doing. I got into trouble so much for not wearing black, because I'd never been on anything like this, so I very much had to learn on the job. And yeah, the thing about, I think the producer said to me I was sort of probably standing just like awestruck on the first day, all these people running about. And the producer was like, "Yeah, it's good, isn't it?" She said, the most exciting day of your life is your first day on a film set. He said the second day on a film set is the most boring day of your life, which is about true. There's a lot of waiting about. But this was a car chase scene that we shot on, I think, one of the old runways of the old Hong Kong airport. And yeah, it was absolutely incredible. So I was hanging off the side of the film truck here, and I don't know if it's because I was self-taught, because I think it was probably madness. So that was literally shot at a quarter of a second, and off a moving vehicle. And I think that now I wouldn't even try that. But being self-taught as I was, I didn't really have anybody to tell me that I was doing things wrongly, and sometimes I got lucky and they worked. So that was that shoot in Hong Kong. The next thing that happened as a result of Flickr again was in Singapore they were making this TV show called The Big Shot, which was a reality TV show, kind of like America's Next Top Model, except for photographers. So a bunch of photographers will get sent on a challenge every week. Their pictures will get judged, and they will somebody will get eliminated. And applying to be a contestant on that show, you had to fill out a form saying name some of your favourite photographers, and a few people put my name down. I'd never been to Singapore. This is obviously again just through Flickr, and the producer saw my name come up a few times. He said, contact that guy and have a Skype with him and see if he wants to be a judge. So that's why for 3 years, a month a year, I would go to Singapore and be a judge on this TV show, which was again madness because I was so young and I was critiquing the work of guys who'd been taking pictures before I was born. But it was an incredible experience, and I was probably getting quite up my own arse after these things because I thought I've made it, I'm doing all these exciting stuff. And then I came back to Glasgow after that, and then, work was quiet again, and I was back to scraping by. So I'm telling you these stories, but they're actually, that's just like a lot of luck, I think. So to something more realistic, the thing that set me to doing what I kind of do day to day now was that I met a theatre maker, a director called Stuart Lang, who was a friend of an actor that I was friends with, and we met. I met him on a night out once, and that was that. But he had sort of followed my work on Flickr again, and then after a couple of years, he gave me a message and said he'd like me to photograph one of his shows. So it kind of just went from there, and these were the years that followed that were pretty good years for me, and that was just like working in theatre and becoming established there. So in theatre, it's sort of there are three strands to it. You do rehearsal photography, production photography, and the promotional stuff, which is maybe the posters you see like advertising the shows on the tube. So yes, this is in classical music. That was the other strand of that. So here, for example, here's rehearsals, and then theatre production stuff. And the promotional images, something like that. Yes, that was a promotional image for a theatre show. That was for a show, a director called David Leddy, and I really loved working with him because I'm not very good at Photoshop and I'm not very good in studios either. So whenever I get an email saying, I've got this idea, say, of a woman in the sea with a crossbow, what could we do with Photoshop? I basically, sometimes I just have to say, no, I'm not the right person for this if that's what you want to do. But I loved working with David because when he said, I want a woman in the sea with a crossbow, I knew that that's what we were going to do. We're literally going to get an old lady and put her in the sea and give her a crossbow. So getting established in theatre, that's partly word of mouth and so on, and then if other companies see the work that you do and it's good, then they'll get in touch with you. But a lot of it was, again, a bit of hustle, and that was, I was out most nights, and sometimes that'd be at theatre shows or just in bars or whatever. But people say it's been in the right place at the right time, and that's true. But you can help that by being in lots of places, and sometimes at the right places. So you go out and you meet people. For example, I would go out to theatre shows. And at the intervals, I'd talk to people in the bars, or you meet people. I don't smoke anymore, but and I don't recommend it either. But that was if there was a director that I wanted to talk to, that was a good way. You see them go out for a smoke, you go and join them for a smoke. And so I'll give you an example of how word of mouth can happen. I worked on a show called the Salon Project. Oh, so that's just an example of sort of promo theatre stuff. Yeah, this was the Salon Project, and it started in Scotland, but then it went on tour to London, to the Barbican, and it was a sort of quite experimental, immersive performance piece, and the photographer was part of the performance, so I had to be there for every show. And anyway, the images from that went on the Barbican's website, even though it wasn't commissioned by the Barbican, it just was there. And then when the Barbican were doing a rebrand, their design agency were looking through some of the stuff on the website, And the design agency were like, oh, we like this, who took that? And they got in touch with me and brought me down to do some stuff for the Barbican. And then I started to work for that design agency doing other things. And one of the girls that worked at that design agency, she went on years later to work at a different design agency, which now gets me down to London to do various things. And then including one of the things that design agency got me to do was the prospectus for Kingston University down there. And then the guy who worked at Kingston University moved up here to work for City of Glasgow College, and he got me in to do stuff there. So this is it. I mean, it's just the more work you do, and if it's good, then it will. And also the important thing about here is like to be nice to people. Do you know what I mean? Like, you could think that, oh, I'm here with this sort of like big design agency. I don't really need to bother with the university staff so much, but and I'm not being nice just to get more work. I'm just nice because I'm nice, but it pays to be just a nice person, and easy to work with. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, you don't want to take any shit, but you want to make life easy for the people that you're working for as well. So these were, again, pretty good years, and then it sort of came to a peak in 2014 when I kind of felt like I was doing like so much theatre work in Scotland, and I think I probably got complacent because I was kind of doing it all. And then in the years that followed that, I noticed that I was getting less work, and I would see work coming online, that wasn't by me, and I realised that just as I had like at one point like hot new thing and like putting all these other old guys out of work, then that was happening to me now, and it was probably a good thing because it would have been really annoying for me if I'd seen other people doing the work and it was shit, but it was actually really good, and I was like, wow, this is good work, and I have to up my game, and I had realised I had become quite complacent, and so a bit of competition and being forced up your game is really quite is a good thing, I think, and I think it's something to bear in mind. Sometimes when I'm working, if I feel like I need to or want to put more pressure on myself, I just imagine that there's someone else shooting this thing as well, and that I want my images to be, I mean, not better than theirs as such, but it pushes you to do a bit better, push a bit harder. And throughout all this time, I was obviously still keeping up, just taking photographs in my personal life, it's in my interests, so this is just like travel stuff, in fact, this is, so as I say, I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong. I didn't go over specifically for this, but while I was there and the protests were happening, the Yellow Umbrella movement and all that kind of thing, I kind of got involved with that and saw some incredible things. So, and that's...
So the orders are a wee bit off here.
Oh, that's all right, not to worry. I mean, these were just like bits and bobs. So, again, yeah, that's from the sort of Hong Kong protests. And another one there. So, the next big thing to happen was COVID, basically, and working mostly in live performance. I had no work at all, and nobody to photograph either. So this is like that's a self-portrait of just sort of an example of how I kept my sort of creative juices flowing while in lockdown. COVID was tough, I suppose, but the government help was okay, and there was a Creative Scotland fund that sort of helped me out. But what happened there was that, I mean, at first I was quite depressed because not only it was photography, what I did for a living, but it was also quite a big part of my identity. I thought of myself very much as a photographer. And I think the good thing about COVID was that changed that. I sort of, now if I didn't get any more professional work, I'd struggle to live, but I wouldn't have an identity crisis, I think, because I discovered I was interested in lots of other things, and there was more to my life than taking pictures. So it was good in that way. But where I did get work in COVID, or just as things were getting better in COVID, was in film and TV. A lot of theatre directors that I knew started directing for TV because they were still allowed to produce, albeit under strict, conditions. So I started to get work in film and TV, and some examples of that. And it was a very different environment. The hours are much longer, and it's a bit more stressful. It's a lot because you get a lot less respect as a stills photographer on a film set, because they're there to make a film and they've got to stop what they're doing for 10 minutes, or you're lucky if you get 5. For the stills photographers, so you're waiting around for hours until you're told, right, okay, you can get your shots now, and you've got to come in and just get them like that because everybody wants to get back to their work. So it's a lot of stress, but you see interesting stuff, and it's enjoyable. And throughout lockdown and sort of just after, I mean, I developed an interest in rock climbing, and that became sort of like what I do most of the time that I'm not working now. And the great thing about photography is that you can incorporate it into every aspect of your life. So obviously now I take lots of pictures of rock climbing when I'm out with my pals doing it, and I haven't really tried to either leverage that to get any kind of professional work out of it. But I mean, that's something that I could do, and something that you can do, I think, with any of your interests. It's a good place to start, especially if you're interested in something that is sort of unusual, and that lends itself well to being photographed. So that sort of like takes me up to the present day. I would say that if I have some sort of like general pieces of advice, or to go through the questions that Stuart sent me, when I was working on the big shot, and I met some sort of like really incredible photographers who'd been doing this for years. One guy called Mike Yamashita, who's a National Geographic photographer, and I couldn't believe that. I mean, I'd always loved his work. I could be his decision, and he was really interested to hear and surprised to hear that, you know, although I was kind of scraping by back then, I was making a living just doing stills. He said that any advice he would give to a young person, and that was 10 years ago, was that they need to be doing video as well. I never have, and I don't have much interest in it either. And I think I'm maybe lucky because of the field I work in is, they're always going to want actual stills of the thing that happened. And for that reason, I think AI is probably not as much of a threat to the kind of photography I do as it is to some others. So, for example, you have seen that AI image won a competition, but the artist was just doing it to start a debate. He would reveal that it's AI. So, yeah, this is from the Instagram of a model that I know, Eunice. And when I saw this picture, I was like, wow, that is incredible. But then you'll see there it says image construction manipulation technology. So this is AI, and I imagine that fashion shoots in the future, you know, this will probably put fashion photographers out of a job because it looks good. And I don't know, to be honest, how much AI consumes in terms of time and resources, and how much it costs, or whether it is a money-saving thing for if a company to do this. Is it cheaper than to do an actual shoot? But it is kind of an interesting time, probably a scary time if you're a working photographer, to be honest. I think AI is to photography kind of like what steroids are to bodybuilding. You know, there's nothing wrong with using them, and they do produce results, but you should be honest about the fact that you're using them. If you're not honest, or even worse, if you're lying about it, then that's a pretty scummy thing to be doing. The other things I've got here are about, when you're starting out, and even when you're not. I mean, I still get a lot of requests to work for exposure, and I would strongly advise you not to do that. I think it's, I mean, even if you do it for a nominal fee, you know, but just like the idea that, I think it's just kind of insulting. Usually it's an insult, you know, it's insulting for them to ask you that in the first place, usually because it's, you know, it's for a money-making venture. If they want to, if they're involved in commerce, then they should be prepared to pay as well as to be paid. But it just devalues our profession as a whole. If people are working for free, they shouldn't have to. On the other hand, I mean, you can maybe, I don't know, it depends on the exposure, but I would generally advise against that. And on that sort of subject of money, it can be really tough to know how to charge people for work. To be honest, I mean, I do have some set rates that would generally give to certain companies, but I'm quite socialistic in my pricing. You know, if I'm working for a big company, I'm going to charge them more than if I'm working for a wee company. So, you know, charge people what they can afford, as long as you feel that it's being fair to yourself as well. And yeah, that sort of takes me up to everything that I wanted to talk about. If any of you have any questions, then yeah, go for it.
Who's your biggest inspiration?
Oh, it's hard to say. I was probably more inspired, to be honest, by cinema than by other photographers. So, yeah, like the films of Michael Mann, I think are so beautiful. And watching stuff like that when I was growing up was probably more of a driver to become a photographer. In fact, it was probably that's probably when I was just taking pictures of anything and everything. But then watching movies like that taught me that actually the image can be a really beautiful thing and can tell a story.
What lenses do you tend to use for theatre?
So theatre, generally a 70 to 200 and a 24 to 70, depending on the theatre. I mean, when you're shooting a dress rehearsal, you can usually have quite a lot of leeway. So if you will want to go up closer and get some wide stuff at some points, and then further back zoomed in. But yeah, those tend to be the two main lenses. In fact, for most of for all performance stuff, that would be the lenses I would have. If I was doing portrait stuff, then I have some primes, like a 50 or an 85 maybe. And then I have a 14 like super wide for I suppose that would be more for sort of performance, but actually not of but more of like the event than the performance. You know what I mean? Like with an audience in and everything like that. Hi.
What platform do you think's best for accumulating work, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. As I say, like I really lament the loss of Flickr because it was great. I think Instagram is probably the best one now, but it is not great at the same time. I mean, for me now, I do use Instagram. I've kind of let Facebook fall by the wayside. And then Twitter is good, not specifically for photographers, but because most people in various industries use it. So for example, most of the theatre people that I work with, it'll be Twitter that they use day to day, so getting your stuff out there on Twitter. And what's quite good about Twitter is the retweet function, so it can actually get seen by, you know, more widely than you might, than is easy on, say, Instagram. Although, I said I don't really use Twitter, but it is probably a good one.
I wonder, you were talking about your climbing, because I've seen quite a lot of your climbing stuff, which looks great. A lot of your pictures look fantastic.
Oh, cheers.
And I wonder, you were saying that you don't really commercialise that. Is that because you want to kind of keep the thing that you love sort of separate from your job, or is it because, or do you see, would there be a marriage of those? Could they look great images? So I'm wondering, is that a sort of conscious decision in your part? Or?
I think, not basically no, I think is the answer to that. I just haven't made the effort yet. I can imagine that I probably will at some point. I think, one, I'm really busy right now, and two, I maybe want to build a better portfolio, and three, probably the thing that's actually subconsciously, but not been conscious about it, but a good friend of mine, one of the guys that got me into climbing, is already a climbing photographer, so I would hate to sort of step on his toes. So I'd have to be, I think if I was to try and get involved in climbing, I'd have to be quite careful that it's in a separate strand from what he does. But I think I might get around to thinking about these things, but as I say, I'll wait a bit.
Considering you're self-taught, what was the best place to go and look for information? Like, what helped you learn?
So, I mean, basically trial and error. I think that, and I mean, most of the technical stuff I know about photography, I could teach to anyone in an hour or two, to be honest. So, for example, I don't really work in studios, and I don't know a great deal about studio lighting. So that's, I think, what I suffer from not having had any sort of formal training, is that I'm not very good in those environments, and to be honest, I don't really enjoy them anyway. So I think, I'm sure you're getting a great grounding here in your course. I think beyond that, it is just trial and error and finding what works for you, and everyone will have their own different styles, and just developing that.
What sort of, do you ever use any additional lighting, or is it just like the light that's available in the events that you do?
So I have a Rotolight. I don't know if you've heard of those, but they're fantastic because they're small, they're powerful, and the full spectrum of temperature and colour, and they're really amazing. The only downside is they are quite expensive, but once you've got one, they're great. So I'd recommend those. I mean, you can buy them. I just have the one that is usually enough for my needs, but you can buy. They all link up, and you can get stands for them and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd recommend those.
Got time for one more question?
What's next for you?
Stage your friend as a photographer for the rock climbing.
Yeah.
You didn't want to tread on his territory, basically.
Yeah.
Will you wait until you've developed your own style before you would go into that, or do you want to keep a healthy relationship with your friend?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, you when you work in the industry and you know other photographers, it's sort of like it's it's fair enough. Sometimes somebody will get work and some won't, but I think he's involved already in that very specific niche, and it would be a bit. And we were friends before that, even so. For me to come into that would be, I think, a bit cheeky. But also, I suppose what's useful is that he does a lot of like ice climbing, like proper up in the mountains stuff, whereas I do more kind of bouldering, without harnesses and all that kind of thing, less gear involved. So, but yeah, a lot of it is just like that kind of. I think in most cases the respect is only professional, and it would be fair enough if somebody gets to work well. But in this case, it's a bit more personal as well. If he's actually a good friend and not just somebody that I've worked with.
What piece of work have you done that you're most proud of?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, I suppose I probably would have put it in here if I was most proud of it. I mean, this one here is probably still my most famous image because it won quite a big competition a while back and was exhibited quite a few places. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to pick just one, to be honest. But I think you've probably seen some of my favourites in this slideshow.
Did you use any extra light in the club images, or was it just all
In which ones?
the club images?
No. So that would have been all available. Like yeah.
And you just took you and your camera and just
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks so much.